All right, it's April 23rd, 2023, 12:30 p.m. on this Sunday. My name is Kessie Ian Anderson. Welcome to a special edition of Heresiarch. In this, I'm going to be reading Report from Iron Mountain on the possibility and desirability of peace. Now, if you do not know, there's a gentleman named Bill Cooper. He's one of the foundational fathers of trutherism in the modern time. Read his book, Behold a Pale Horse. Get the book, don't listen to the audio. They've edited out quite a bit of information, and I trust his information almost implicitly. He's one of the few people who had no agenda other than to wake people up. Now, he made reference to this report, so I'm going to take the time. It's 79 pages, so I'm either going to do this in parts or I'm just going to put the whole thing out there for people to listen to. It's that important. It's a big deal. I've only read through about 10 pages, and already it's very disheartening, and we need to know what we're up against. And this was old. This came out in 1967, so we're going to find out while we read through this. Library of Congress Catalog Card 6727553, printed in the U.S. With introductory material by Leonard C. Lewin, The Dial Press, Incorporated, 1967, New York. So just like the Greenbaum speech, I'm going to do this, and when I hit certain points, I'm going to stop. So this is going to be a ridiculously long video, but in this age of TikTok, if you're not willing to pay the price to get the right information, then that's on you. And then once you get the information, my whole goal is for you to take this, apply it in your life to understand how dire it is, how we need to get preparing. And when I say preparing, food, shelter, water, means to protect it, etc. Maybe if you're not an introvert like me in various ways, to reach out to your neighbors, reach out to people and form a nucleus, red pill people, try to get them awake to what's coming. I mean, if they can't see it, then it does kind of suck, but I don't think we're officially Walking Dead yet, but we'll see where they're trying to go with this. So, report from Iron Mountain. All right, I'm adding this to the intro. I finished the report from Iron Mountain. And of course, when you go online, the Mossad media, the CIA, they will say it's a hoax. Oh, it's a hoax. It's a hoax. And the shills will attack and they'll cry. Just like the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, it's a hoax. It's a hoax. It's a hoax. Okay, let's concede that it is a hoax. Then why is it literally the playbook they are using now? For being a hoax, why is it literally being played out in front of our very eyes? I'll leave that up for you to decide. I've made my decision. I'm not biased. I am biased on this. Here we go. When I hit a spot, I'm going to stop and pontificate. Hopefully I can keep it as short as possible, but here we go. Let's jump in. So page 2 are the contents. Forward, background information, statement by John Doe, the report of the Special Study Group, letter of transmittal, introduction. Section 1, scope of the study. Section 2, disarmament and the economy. Section 3, disarmament scenarios. Section 4, war and peace as social systems. Section 5, the functions of war. Section 6, substitutes for the functions of war. Section 7, summary and conclusions. Section 8, recommendations and notes. So I'm going to treat this like a little mini audiobook here. What's sad is war is just a tool to these people to micromanage and cull society. We're just on a giant plantation and a farm. The animal farm. So here we go, the forward. John Doe, as I will call him in this book for reasons that will be made clear, is a professor at a large university in the Middle West. His field is one of the social sciences, but I will not identify him beyond this. He telephoned me one evening last winter, quite unexpectedly. We had not been in touch for several years. He was in New York for a few days, he said, and there was something important he wanted to discuss with me. He wouldn't say what it was. We met for lunch the next day at a midtown restaurant. He was obviously disturbed. He made small talk for half an hour, which was quite out of character, and I didn't press him. Then, apropos of nothing, he mentioned a dispute between a writer and a prominent political family that had been in the headlines. What, he wanted to know, were my views on freedom of information. How would I qualify them? And so on. My answers were not memorable, but they seemed to satisfy him. Then, quite abruptly, he began to tell me the following story. Early in August of 1963, he said, he found a message on his desk that a Mrs. Potts had called him from Washington. When he returned the call, a man answered immediately and told Doe, among other things, that he had been selected to serve on a commission of the highest importance. Its objective was to determine accurately and realistically the nature of the problems that would confront the United States if and when a condition of permanent peace should arrive, and to draft a program for dealing with this contingency. The man described the unique procedures that were to govern the commission's work and that were expected to extend its scope far beyond that of any previous examination of these problems. Considering that the caller did not precisely identify either himself or his agency, his persuasiveness must have been a truly remarkable order. Doe entertained no serious doubts of the bona fides of the project, however, chiefly because of his previous experience with the excessive secrecy that often surrounds quasi-governmental activities. In addition, the man at the other end of the line demonstrated an impressively complete and surprisingly detailed knowledge of Doe's work and personal life. He also mentioned the names of others who were to serve with the group. Most of them were known to Doe by reputation. Doe agreed to take the assignment. He felt he had no real choice in the matter, and to appear the second Saturday following at Iron Mountain, New York. An airline ticket arrived in his mail the next morning. The cloak and dagger tone of this convocation was further enhanced by the meeting place itself. Iron Mountain, located near the town of Hudson, is like something out of Ian Fleming or E. Phillips Oppenheim. It is an underground nuclear hideout for hundreds of large American corporations. Okay, I'm cutting in. Now, understand, this is in the 50s and 60s, and they've already got this stuff in place. Most of them use it as an emergency storage vault for important documents, but a number of them maintain substitute corporate headquarters as well, where essential personnel could presumably survive and continue to work after an attack. This latter group includes such firms as Standard Oil of New Jersey, Manufacturers Hanover Trust, and Shell. Klipos. I will leave most of the story of the operations of the Special Study Group, as the commission was formally called, for Doe to tell in his own words. Background information. At this point, it is necessary to say only that it met and worked regularly for over 2.5 years, after which it produced a report. It was this document, and what to do about it, that Doe wanted to talk to me about. The report, he said, had been suppressed, both by the Special Study Group itself and by the government intra-agency committee to which it had been submitted. After months of agonizing, Doe had decided that he would no longer be party to keeping it secret. And I'm going to jump in again. We need these type of people. We need more whistleblowers, actual whistleblowers, not LARPers, not liars, not Mossad and CIA disinfo. And then who knows, this whole thing could be disinfo as well. However, we've had the test of time that we can look back on this document and we can judge for ourselves. Is this fake, or is it just basically the playbook? Now, back into it. What he wanted from me was advice and assistance in having it published. He gave me his copy to read, with the express understanding that if for any reason I were unwilling to become involved, I would say nothing about it to anyone else. I read the report that same night. I will pass over my own reactions to it, except to say that the unwillingness of Doe's associates to publicize their findings became readily understandable. What had happened was that they had been so tenacious in their determination to deal comprehensively with the many problems of transition to peace that the original questions asked of them were never quite answered. Instead, this is what they concluded. Lasting peace, while not theoretically impossible, is probably unattainable. Even if it could be achieved, it would almost certainly not be in the best interests of a stable society to achieve it. This is what the elites and the thinkers have in store for us. This is what they believe, that a sustainable peace is not in the best interests of a stable society to achieve it. That is the gist of what they say. Behind their qualified academic language runs this general argument. War fills certain functions essential to the stability of our society. Until other ways of filling them are developed, the war system must be maintained and improved in effectiveness. Look at Russia and Ukraine right now. I don't even know how much is staged, how much is a lie, how much is real. I have no clue how big the wag the dog propaganda machine is going on. There was a tank from Russia, the Ukraine war, that showed up in a truck stop in Louisville, just left on a trailer. What the hell? Because they're filming this shit here in the United States. A lot of it is lies. What's going on over there? I don't trust any of it. It's a big money laundering operation. People need to wake up. So here we continue on page 5. It is not surprising that the group, in its letter of transmittal, did not choose to justify its work to the lay reader unexposed to the exigencies of higher political or military responsibility. Its report was addressed deliberately to unnamed government administrators of high rank, it assumed, considerable political sophistication from this select audience. So basically the puppets of the military-industrial complex and Israel. To the general reader, therefore, the substance of the document may be even more unsettling than its conclusions. He may not be prepared for some of its assumptions, for instance, that most medical advances are viewed more as problems than as progress, or that poverty is necessary and desirable. Public postures by politicians to the contrary notwithstanding, or that standing armies are, among other things, social welfare institutions in exactly the same sense as our old people's homes and mental hospitals. What good is a standing army if they're not put to use? It's just a burden. It's an expense on the assets and liability sheet, on your little T-square. So this is how the slavers look at us. And if you don't have a Zogbot dying for Israel, it's of no effect. And if you know anything about the strawman account, every death allows them to hit your Sesveki account and make tons more money. We are all worth more money to them dead than alive. And since money is their god, it's all follow the money, follow the instability. Peace does not bring them tranquility. They only get power, loosh, you name it, when we are in a living hell. So let's continue. It may strike him as odd to find the probably explanation of flying saucer incidents disposed of en passant in less than a sentence. He may be less surprised to find that the space program and the controversial anti-missile missile and fallout shelter programs are understood to have the spending of vast sums of money, not the advancement of science or national defense as their principal goals, and to learn that military draft policies are only remotely concerned with defense. The puppet masters run every government. Understand that. It is global in scope. They control all chess pieces on the board. They don't care about us. He may be offended to find the organized repression of minority groups, and even the reestablishment of slavery, seriously and on the whole favorably discussed as possible aspects of a world at peace. He is not likely to take kindly to the notion of the deliberate intensification of air and water pollution as part of a program leading to peace. Even when the reason for considering it is made clear, that a world without war will have to turn sooner rather than later to universal test tube procreation will be less disturbing, if no more appealing. But few readers will not be taken aback, at least, by a few lines in the report's conclusions, repeated in its formal recommendations, that suggest that the long-range planning and budgeting of the optimum number of lives to be destroyed annually in overt warfare is high on the group's list of priorities for government action. I cite these few examples primarily to warn the general reader what he can expect. The statesmen and strategists for whose eyes the report was intended obviously need no such protective admonition. This book, of course, is evidence of my response to Doe's request after carefully considering the problems that might confront the publisher of the report. We took it to the Dial Press. There, its significance was immediately recognized, and, more important, we were given firm assurances that no outside pressures of any sort would be permitted to interfere with its publication. It should be made clear that Doe does not disagree with the substance of the report, which represents his genuine consensus in all important respects. He constituted a minority of one, but only on the issue of disclosing it to the general public. A look at how the group dealt with this question will be illuminating. So we are literally dealing with the arm of flesh. These people look at us. We are the children, they are the parent. They are the God, we are the slave to whatever their God is. They don't care about us. They know what's best for us. Their lives have more values than ours. Their life has more value than ours. The debate took place at the group's last full meeting before the report was written, late in March 1966, and again at Iron Mountain. Two facts must be kept in mind by way of background. The first is that the Special Study Group had never been explicitly charged with or sworn to secrecy, either when it was convened or at any time thereafter. The second is that the group had nevertheless operated as if it had been. This was assumed from the circumstances of its inception and from the tone of its instructions. The group's acknowledgement of help from the many persons who contributed so greatly to our work is somewhat equivocal. These persons were not told the nature of the project for which their special resources of information were solicited. Those who argued the case for keeping the report secret were admittedly motivated by fear of the explosive political effects that could be expected from publicity. For evidence, they pointed to the suppression of the far less controversial report of then-Senator Hubert Humphrey's Subcommittee on Disarmament in 1962. Subcommittee members had reportedly feared that it might be used by communist propagandists, as Senator Stuart Symington put it, to back up the Marxian theory that production was the reason for the success of capitalism. Similar political precautions had been taken with the better-known Gaither Report in 1957 and even with the so-called Moynihan Report in 1965. Furthermore, they insisted a distinction must be made between serious studies, which are normally classified unless and until policymakers decide to release them, and conventional showcase projects, organized to demonstrate a political leadership's concerns about an issue and to deflect the energy of those pressing for action on it. The example used, because some of the group had participated in it, was a Weil House Conference on Intended Cooperation, Disarmament, etc., which had been staged late in 1965 to offset complaints about escalation of Vietnam War. Doe acknowledges this distinction as well as the strong possibility of public misunderstanding, but he feels that if the sponsoring agency had wanted to mandate secrecy, it could have done so at the outset. It could also have assigned the project to one of the government's established think tanks, which normally work on a classified basis. He scoffed at fear of public reaction, which could have no lasting effect on long-range measures that might be taken to implement the group's proposals, and derided the group's abdication of responsibility for its opinions and conclusions. So far as he was concerned, there was such a thing as a public right to know what was being done on its behalf. The burden of proof was on those who would abridge it. If my account seems to give Doe the better of the argument despite his failure to convince his colleagues, so be it. My participation in this book testifies that I am not neutral. In my opinion, the decision of the Special Study Group to censor its own findings was not merely timid but presumptuous. But the refusal as of this writing of the agencies for which the report was prepared to release it themselves raises broader questions of public policy. Such questions center on the continuing use of self-serve definitions of security to avoid possible political embarrassment. It is ironic how often this practice backfires. I should state for the record that I do not share the attitudes toward war and peace, life and death, and survival of the species manifested in the report. Few readers will. In human terms, it is an outrageous document, but it does represent a serious and challenging effort to define an enormous problem, and it explains, or certainly appears to explain, aspects of American policy otherwise incomprehensible by the ordinary standards of common sense. What we may think of these explanations is something else. But it seems to me that we are entitled to know not only what they are, but whose they are. By whose, I don't mean merely the names of the authors of the report. Much more important, we have a right to know to what extent their assumptions of social necessity are shared by the decision makers in our government. Which do they accept and which do they reject? However disturbing the answers, only full and frank discussion offers any conceivable hope of solving the problems raised by the Special Study Group in their report from Iron Mountain. LCL, New York, June 1967. Now I'm going to jump in. I like how this is already calling out the faces behind the curtain. We need to know who these people are. They have names. They have addresses. They probably have security guards for good reason. They're probably in gated communities that you could never get access to. They might even be possibly underground as I speak. Now, this was 1960s. We've had a solid 60 plus years to see the fruits of this report and how valid it is. I will argue there is a religion behind this. It's the whole point of my channel. I guarantee the people involved on this are being swayed by the Marxist mindset. We know that McCarthy lost and McCarthy was right when the Venona cables hit. The Venona cables hit and proved that we were already infiltrated by communism, and communism is Judaism. Period. And what's interesting is how many other reports this alludes to already. How many other reports have we not read through? Like, in the truther communities, people throw out documents all the time. How many people take the time to read through them? Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of nonsense out there. A lot of nonsense. A lot of it is hopium. A lot of it is Bible stuff that is obviously going to happen, but it's scripted, is my argument. So I don't discredit it. I just don't put into it the weight and the views and the deference that others might have for it, because I see it as a threat. I don't see it as a salvation. Now, none of this is causing me to live in fear. I'm just living in pragmatism of what's coming and what has happened. So we need to prepare accordingly. I would say vote accordingly, but voting does not matter. So we're already getting the Trump and the RFK narrative. I have an opinion and a theory already. I'm just going to put it down on record. RFK is going to lose to Biden. Trump is going to reach out to him to be his VP. So it'll be Trump and RFK. And already RFK has already said some stuff about global warming that I'm already 100% against. So in his zeal to jail scientists over COVID, he's also made some damning explanations or damning proposals about climate denial. I am a climate change denial. It's geoengineered. It is controlled. It is 100% a geo weapon. All of our weather is fake, is what I'm arguing. You don't have to accept that, but I can show you patents all the way up to the solar simulator where they have potentially replaced even the sun because it is a local body. Hate me all you want on that, but I'm just going where documentation goes, which I trust a whole lot more than the historical narratives that I've been lied to from everything. Everything is a lie. From World War II, back to the Revolutionary War, back to President George Washington selling us out in 1775. There's a book called The Great Adventure. Maybe it's called The Great American Adventure by a fictitious name, pen name by Judge Dale. That book lays out the straw man account and more information about how we've already been sold out, even before they had the Constitution formed. All at the feet of Mason George Washington. So what we've been fed, anything that comes from our Judeo education system, is terrible. It's wrong. It's a lie to keep us as slaves. So here we go. Let's continue. Page 8, background information. The following account of the workings of the Special Study Group is taken verbatim from a series of tape-recorded interviews I had with John Doe. The transcript has been edited to minimize the intrusion of my questions and comments as well as for length, and the sequence has been revised in the interest of continuity. How was the group formed? The general idea for this kind of study dates back to at least 1961. It started with some of the new people who came in with the Kennedy administration, mostly, I think, with McNamara, Bundy, and Rusk. They were impatient about many things. One of them was that no really serious work had been done about planning for peace, a long-range peace, that is, with long-range planning. Everything that had been written on the subject before 1961 was superficial. There was insufficient appreciation of the scope of the problem. The main reason for this, of course, was that the idea of a real peace in the world, general disarmament, and so on, was looked on as utopian, or even crackpot. This is still true, and it's easy enough to understand when you look at what's going on in the world today. It was reflected in the studies that had been made up to that time. They were not realistic. The idea of the special study, the exact form it would take, was worked out early in 1963. The settlement of the Cuban Missile Affair had something to do with it, but what helped most to get it moving were the big changes in military spending that were being planned. Plants being closed, relocations, and so forth. Most of it wasn't made public until much later. I understand it took a long time to select the people for the group. The calls didn't go out until the summer. Who made the selection? That's something I can't tell you. I wasn't involved with the preliminary planning. The first I knew of it was when I was called myself. But 3 of the people had been in on it, and what the rest of us know we learned from them about what went on earlier. I do know that it started very informally. I don't know what particular government agency approved the project. Would you care to make a guess? All right. I think it was an ad hoc committee at the cabinet level, or near it. It had to be. I suppose they gave the organizational job, making arrangements, paying the bills, and so on, to somebody from the state or defense of the National Security Council. Only one of us was in touch with Washington, and I wasn't the one. But I can tell you that very, very few people knew about us. For instance, there was the Ackley Committee. It was set up after we were. If you read their report, the same old tune, economic reconversion, turning sword plants into plowshare factories. I think you'll wonder if even the president knew about our group. The Ackley Committee certainly didn't. Is that possible, really? I mean, that not even the president knew of your commission? I'm going to jump in on that. Yeah, the president doesn't know a lot. We found that out that the president really doesn't control jack shit. The president is just a little puppet figure. He talks a big game, but it's funny how he can run by executive order on everything except for what actually matters. Why not just executive order the damn wall, Trump? Oh, but we had to do the Kabuki theater. They wouldn't approve the $5 billion we need, but we can give $100 billion to Ukraine. Wow, people. Come on. All right, back into it. Well, I don't think there's anything odd about the government attacking a problem at 2 different levels, or even about 2 or 3 government agencies working at cross purposes. It happens all the time. Perhaps the president did know, and I don't mean to denigrate the Ackley Committee, but it was exactly that narrowness of approach that we were supposed to get away from. You have to remember, you've read the report, that what they wanted from us was a different kind of thinking. It was a matter of approach. Herman Kahn calls it Byzantine. No agonizing over cultural and religious values. No moral posturing. It's the kind of thinking that Rand and the Hudson Institute and IDA, Institute for Defense Analysis, brought into war planning. What they asked us to do, and I think we did it, was to give the same kind of treatment to the hypothetical nuclear war. We may have gone further than they expected, but once you establish your premises and your logic, you can't turn back. I'm jumping in again. So basically he's stating that they wanted them to be very amoral. Look at it as numbers. Look at it as statistics. Take your logic and run it to its end conclusion. So I have respect for that answer. I respect when people set the rules to the game and stick by the rules and follow through on it. Though I'm not going to like their conclusions, because I will argue it's probably a bunch of commie atheists that put them up to it from the Mossad and CIA. Posing as people from the State Department, well, the State Department's in on it too, the Department of Defense, DOD, DARPA, they're all under Israel control. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. If you don't accept that, well, I'm going to be doing even more videos later about the Russian mafia ties to human trafficking and how they all had Israeli passports. So though they're pinning it and trying to, I mean, you have to understand, in Judaism, it's called the diaspora. They've jelly beans scattered amongst nations, but yet they're always dual loyalists. Jonathan Pollard says that we are always dual loyalists, and if you remember from my last video, he was the spy that stole all of the secrets from us, and Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel lavished this guy with everything. He was the greatest thing since sliced bread, since basically Robert Maxwell himself, Mossad super spy. So they're not on our team is what I'm trying to tell you. Now here we go. Khan's books, for example, are misunderstood, at least by laymen. They shock people. But you see, what's important about them is not his conclusions or his opinions, it's the method. He has done more than anyone else I can think of to get the general public accustomed to the style of modern military thinking. Today, it's possible for a columnist to write about counterforce strategy and minimum deterrence and credible first strike capability without having to explain every other word. He can write about war and strategy without getting bogged down in questions or morality. And that's pill pull. That's media magic. That's word magic. That's semantic manipulation. The way you posture things, the way you word things, getting consent without people truly understanding what it is. So in war, they can tell us straight up that they droned a village of people and we just look at it as a Monday morning. The war machine has perfected us using its Mossad media, using Hollywood. Well, Tom Cruise, it's a very patriotic show. Yeah, just to gin up the right-wing Zogbots to sign up and die for Israel. They didn't point out an enemy. They don't have the balls to point out a true enemy, because if they did, if they pointed out the real enemy, then you're a bad guy. It's all to get us passionate. It's all to get us excited. It's all... Anyway, to continue. The other big difference about our work is breadth. The report speaks for itself. I can't say that we took every relevant aspect of life and society into account, but I don't think we missed anything essential. Why was the project given to an outside commission? Why couldn't it have been handled by an appropriate government agency? I think that's obvious, or should be. The kind of thinking wanted from our group just isn't to be had in a formal government operation. Too many constraints, too many inhibitions. This isn't a new problem. Why else would outfits like Rand and Hudson stay in business? Any assignment that's at all sophisticated is almost always given to an outside group. This is true even in the State Department in the gray operations, those that are supposed to be unofficial, but are really as official as can be, also with the CIA. For our study, even the private research centers were too institutional. A lot of thought went into making sure that our thinking would be unrestricted. All kinds of little things. The way we were called into the group, the places we met, all kinds of subtle devices to remind us. For instance, even our name, the Special Study Group. You know government names. Wouldn't you think we'd have been called Operation Olive Branch or Project Pacifica or something like that? Nothing like that for us. Too elusive, too suggestive, and no minutes of our meetings, too inhibiting, about who might be reading them. Of course, we took notes for our own use, and among ourselves, we usually called ourselves the Iron Mountain Boys, or Our Thing, or whatever came to mind. So they created this outside group, which in strategy terms is a cutout. So you have a hand with 5 fingers. Well, if one of those fingers gets exposed, you cut it off. And the hand and the other finger still continue on. And then at some point, that finger that's missing will miraculously grow back and continue doing what it was doing. We the public, we the TikTok, we the 2-minute sound bites thinking we know shit. We got to delve into this type of stuff, this deep dive. So this is, I'm on page 10 of 79. So he called it out. President probably doesn't know what's going on. There's so much going on behind the scenes. So I'm going to look into that Khan guy. I have a feeling I can make some already assumptions, but I don't want to assume. So back to it. What can you tell me about the members of the group? I'll have to stick to generalities. There were 15 of us. The important thing that The important thing was that we represented a very wide range of disciplines, and not all academic. People from the natural sciences, the social sciences, even the humanities. We had a lawyer and a businessman, also a professional war planner. Also, you should know that everyone in the group had done work of distinction in at least 2 different fields. The interdisciplinary element was built in. It's true that there were no women in the group, but I don't think that was significant. We were all American citizens, of course, and all, I can say, in very good health, at least when we began. You see, the first order of business at the first meeting was the reading of dossiers. They were very detailed, and not just professional, but also personal. They included medical histories. I remember one very curious thing, for whatever it's worth. Most of us, and that includes me, had a record of abnormally high uric acid concentrations in the blood. None of us had ever had this experience of a public inspection of credentials or medical reports. It was very disturbing. And that's what they had back in the 60s on people. Imagine the level of... Imagine every one of our computers has a keylogger. Intel has a backdoor built into everything. The NSA databases are just rife. They have everything on every one of us. I'm on every list in the book, but I don't give a shit. Whatever. Don't care. Now, what's funny is in our woke society, getting our morals from the telephone, the war with Asia, the war with East Asia, the second the media flips on a dime, the morals and mindsets of the slaves flip with it. It is a truly 1984 MK Ultra dystopia that we're living in. I guarantee the way they were talking, I guarantee they were using, like right now, you have to be woke, you have to, and even then on the conservative side, you have to cry about Bud Light and all this stupid bullshit going on against transgender and all that stuff. No, I don't agree with the transgender agenda, but I do agree that they have the freedom to do what they want. I just don't like it being marketed and sold because people are such lemmings that they do fall into this stuff, especially when it comes to feeling good, feeling like you're righteous, feeling like you're doing morally good things. Everybody wants to please. Everybody wants to. And so right now, the Munchausen moms are loving this transgender stuff. They get a virtue signal from here to forever. They love it. Now, I disagree with that because I know it's a death sentence to these poor kids as they get older, unless that's their fetish, that's actually their thing, and they just love surfing Grindr for freaks. So what's going to happen is I guarantee that they removed all discourse in this meeting. Now, this is me speculating. Some of you are like, get on with it. I just want to hear this. No, this is my channel, doing my stuff. So they're going through, I guarantee racism was a big deal. They were calling out every stereotype you can imagine. Guaranteed they were not adhering to social virtue signaling. They were being hard, asking hard questions and giving hard answers and truths. And we're going to find out. Now, apparently we're only getting notes and minutes. They didn't record, and the government wanted plausible deniability, so they had to have their cutout. All right, let's get back into it. But it was deliberate. The reason for it was to emphasize that we were supposed to make all our own decisions on procedure without outside rules. This included judging each other's qualifications and making allowances for possible bias. I don't think it affected our work directly, but it made the point it was supposed to make, that we should ignore absolutely nothing that might conceivably affect our objectivity. Now, that's a big deal. I love this already. I love this concept, though I'm going to disagree with all the conclusions they're making, but I love the concept that you get a group of people and you push back against their bias. There are various people I have conversations with. You can trash Christianity forever, but the second you bring up Islam and Judaism, they flip their shit on you. They will flip out. They will cry. It's like, no. The weapon used for you will be used against you. If I'm going to attack Christianity over anything or critique something that I disagree with, and I put that into Judaism and Islam, wow, I can tear those apart light years worse than Christianity. And it's not because I'm just born into Christianity. It's because if I look at it in an objective lens, so many people have biases that they think they're open-minded until you prove their hypocrisy. I guarantee very few people have read through the Talmud. Very few people understand the underpinnings of Judaism. I hold Judaism in the worst regard of all religions, period. Fact. I stand by that. I have read through so much and slogged through so much racism, so much pedophilia, so much degeneracy in those books that is justified amongst the rabbis. So there you go. In my world, I will side with Christianity, though I am not a Christian. I will defend Christianity, though I am not a Christian. I will side and ally with Christianity, though I am not a Christian. That is the team that offers the most freedom, period. That if I stray off their plantation, they will not hunt me down and kill me like Islam. If I stray off their plantation, I will not be censored and shut down to the degree of Judaism. Now, there still are calls for censorship, but Christianity has been very tolerant to a fault. So it is the least of all evils in terms of the Abraham faith. I have no use for Abraham in general, or Moses, or King Solomon, or anybody tied to the Torah. I don't trust Torah, I don't trust oral Torah, I don't trust Talmud, Zohar, any of that Kabbalah nonsense. Judeo-Satanism is not my idea of a good time. And that is where we're going to. Add in the technocracy, add in the AI, add in their desperation. I mean, look at what Elon Musk said. Elon Musk literally proved everything that I'm talking about when he says that they are trying to bring out a Messiah AI.
So all of a sudden AI is everywhere. People who weren't quite sure what it was are playing with it on their phones. Is that good or bad?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about AI for a long time, since I was in college, really. It was one of the things that, the sort of 4 or 5 things I thought would really affect the future dramatically. It is fundamentally profound in that the smartest creatures, as far as we know, on this earth are humans, is our defining characteristic.
Yes.
We're obviously weaker than, say, chimpanzees and less agile, but we are smarter. So now what happens when something vastly smarter than the smartest person comes along in silicon form? It's very difficult to predict what will happen in that circumstance. It's called the singularity. It's, it's a singularity like a black hole, because
yes.
you don't know what happens after that. It's hard to predict. So I think we should be cautious with AI, and I think there should be some government oversight, because it affects it's a danger to the public. And so when you have things that are a danger to the public, like, let's say, so food and drugs. That's why we have the Food and Drug Administration,
right,
and the Federal Aviation Administration, the FCC. We have these agencies to oversee things that affect the public, where there could be public harm. And you don't want companies cutting corners on safety, and then having people suffer as a result. Anyway, so I think we should take this seriously, and we should have a regulatory agency. I think it needs to start with a group that initially seeks insight into AI, then solicits opinion from industry, and then has proposed rulemaking, and then those rules, will probably, hopefully, grudgingly be accepted by the major players in AI, and I think we'll have a better chance of advanced AI being beneficial to humanity in that circumstance.
But all regulations start with a perceived danger. Planes fall out of the sky, or food causes botulism.
Yes.
I don't think the average person
Yes.
playing with AI on his iPhone perceives any danger. Can you just roughly explain what you think the dangers might be?
Yeah, so the danger, really, AI is perhaps more dangerous than, say, mismanaged aircraft design or production maintenance, or bad car production, in the sense that it has the potential, however small one may regard that probability, but it is non-trivial. It has the potential of civilizational destruction. There's movies like Terminator, but it wouldn't quite happen like Terminator, because the intelligence would be in the data centers.
Right.
The robot's just the end effector. But I think perhaps what you may be alluding to here is that regulations are really only put into effect after something terrible has happened.
That's correct.
If that's the case for AI, and we only put in regulations after something terrible has happened, it may be too late to actually put the regulations in place. The AI may be in control at that point.
You think that's real? It is conceivable that AI could take control and reach a point where you couldn't turn it off, and it would be making the decisions for people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, that's definitely where things are headed, for sure. I mean, the things like say ChatGPT, which is based on GPT-4 from OpenAI, which is a company that I played a critical role in creating, unfortunately.
Back when it was a nonprofit?
Yes. I mean, the reason OpenAI exists at all is that Larry Page and I used to be close friends, and I would stay at his house in Palo Alto, and I would talk to him late into the night about AI safety. And at least my perception was that Larry was not taking AI safety seriously enough.
What did he say about it?
He really seemed to be one sort of digital superintelligence, basically digital God, if you will, as soon as possible.
He wanted that?
Yes. He's made many public statements over the years that the whole goal of Google is what's called AGI, artificial general intelligence, or artificial superintelligence. No, and I agree with him that there's great potential for good, but there's also potential for bad. And so if you've got some radical new technology, you want to try to take the set of actions that maximize the probability it will do good and minimize the probability it will do bad things.
Yes.
It can't just be hell for leather. Let's just go, barreling forward and, hope for the best. And then at one point, I said, well, what about, we're going to make sure humanity's okay here. And then he called me a speciesist.
Did he use that term?
Yes. And there were witnesses. I wasn't the only one there when he called me a speciesist. And so I was like, okay, that's it. Yes, I'm a speciesist. Okay. You got me. What are you? Yeah, I'm fully a speciesist. Busted. So that was the last straw. At the time, Google had acquired DeepMind, and so Google and DeepMind together had about 3/4 of all the AI talent in the world. They obviously had a tremendous amount of money and more computers than anyone else. So I'm like, okay, we have a unipolar world here, where there's just one company that has close to a monopoly on AI talent and computers, like scaled computing. And the person who's in charge doesn't seem to care about safety. This is not good. So then I thought, what's the furthest thing from Google would be like a nonprofit that is fully open, because Google was closed for profit. So that's why the open in OpenAI refers to open source, transparency, so people know what's going on.
Yes.
And that we don't want to have like while I'm normally in favor of for-profit, we don't want this to be sort of a profit-maximizing demon from hell.
That's right.
That just never stops.
Right.
So that's how OpenAI would.
So you want speciesist incentives here, incentives that.
Yes, I think we want pro-human.
Yeah.
Let's make the future good for the humans.
Yes.
Yes, because we're humans.
So can you just put it? I keep pressing you, but just for people who haven't thought this through and aren't familiar with it, and the cool parts of artificial intelligence are so obvious. Write your college paper for you, write a limerick about yourself.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot there that's fun and useful. But can you be more precise about what's potentially dangerous and scary? Like, what could it do? What specifically are you worried about?
Okay, going with old sayings, the pen is mightier than the sword. So if you have a super intelligent AI that is capable of writing incredibly well and in a way that is very influential, convincing, and is constantly figuring out what is more convincing to people over time, and then enters social media, for example, Twitter, but also Facebook and others, and potentially manipulates public opinion in a way that is very bad. How would we even know?
He knows. He's part of their team. Now to continue. At this point, I persuaded Doe that a brief occupational description of the individual members of the group would serve as a useful purpose for readers of the report. The list which follows was worked out on paper. It might be more accurate to say it was negotiated. The problem was to give as much relevant information as possible without violating Doe's commitment to protect his colleagues' anonymity. It turned out to be very difficult, especially in the cases of those members who are very well known. For this reason, secondary areas of achievement or reputations are usually not shown. The simple alphabetical names were assigned by Doe for convenient reference. They bear no intended relation to actual names. Abel was the group's Washington contact. It was he who brought and read the dossier and who was most often acted as chairman. He, Baker, and Cox were the three who had been involved in the preliminary planning. There is no other significance to the order of listing. Arthur Abel is a historian and political theorist who has served in government. Bernard Baker is a professor of international law and a consultant on government operations. Charles Cox is an economist, social critic, and biographer. John Doe. Edward Ellis is a sociologist often involved in public affairs. Frank Cox is a cultural anthropologist. George Green is a psychologist, educator, and developer of personnel testing systems. Harold Hill is a psychiatrist who has conducted extensive studies of the relationship between individual and group behavior. John Jones is a scholar and literary critic. Martin Miller is a physical chemist whose work has received international recognition at the highest level. Paul Peters is a biochemist who has made important discoveries bearing on reproductive processes. Richard Rowe is a mathematician affiliated with an independent West Coast research institution. Samuel Smith is an astronomer, physicist, and communications theorist. Thomas Taylor is a systems analyst and war planner who has written extensively on war, peace, and international relations. William White is an industrialist who has undertaken many special government assignments. How did the group operate? I mean, where and when did you meet, and so forth? We met on the average of once a month. Usually it was on weekends and usually for 2 days. We had a few longer sessions and one that lasted only 4 hours. We met all over the country, always at a different place except for the first and last times, which were Iron Mountain. It was like a traveling seminar, sometimes at hotels, sometimes at universities. Twice we met at summer camps and once at a private estate in Virginia. We used a business place in Pittsburgh and another in Poughkeepsie, New York. We never met in Washington or on government property anywhere. Abel would announce the times and places 2 meetings ahead. They were never changed. We didn't divide into subcommittees or anything else that formal, but we all took individual assignments between meetings. A lot of it involved getting information from other people among the 15 of us. I don't think there was anybody in the academic or professional world we couldn't call on if we wanted to, and we took advantage of it. We were paid a very modest per diem. All of it was called expenses on the vouchers. We were told not to report it on our tax returns. The checks were drawn on a special account of Abel's at a New York bank. He then signed them. I don't know what the study cost. So far as our time and travel were concerned, it couldn't have come to more than the low 6-figure range, but the big item must have been computer time, and I have no idea how high this ran. You say that you don't think your work was affected by professional bias? What about political and philosophical bias? Is it possible to deal with questions of war and peace without reflecting personal values? Yes, it is. I can understand your skepticism, but if you had been at any of our meetings, you'd have had a very hard time figuring out who were the liberals and who were the conservatives, or who were the hawks and who were the doves. There is such a thing as objectivity, and I think we had it. I don't say no one had any emotional reaction to what we were doing. We all did to some extent. As a matter of fact, 2 members had heart attacks after we were finished, and I'll be the first to admit it probably wasn't a coincidence. So we do know about the CIA heart attack gun. Well, now we know about the mRNA injections that are actually causing myocarditis and sudden deaths, SADS. So when he says this, and I do agree with this, I agree that if you're an honest broker, you can shelve your biases. You can. I get in debates online and I just seethe. I get so incensed and infuriated, but the goal is to remove emotion. Try to be as logical as possible. So I agree with him. Now, in this world of being taken offense at all costs, and I do, I get offended over a ton of things. It's just I take it, I put it against my little moral code of, are they acting in their own sphere? is it their right to act in their own sphere? And if it is, it's none of my business. The problem is these guys have this little think tank, and it's working on behalf of the greater powers that be. But he says they can be objective, and you can. It's like in my book that I just got up on audiobook. If somebody reads it, they'll be able to hint. I tried to do my best to hide the bias, but there were places I purposefully let the shield down. But some people will wonder if they read my story which team I'm on. And I did it on purpose. It wasn't me to just call out and complain and cry and have an axe to grind. I'm trying to do it illustrating it with my characters in the story, not just my opinion. Whereas here, I just go off. So, to continue. You said you made up your own ground rules. What were these ground rules? The most important were informality and unanimity. By informality, I mean that our discussions were open-ended. We went as far afield as any one of us thought we had to. For instance, we spent a lot of time on the relationship between military recruitment policies and industrial employment. Before we were finished with it, we'd gone through the history of Western penal codes and any number of comparative psychiatric studies of draftees and volunteers. We looked over the organization of the Inca Empire. We determined the effects of automation on underdeveloped societies. It was all relevant. By unanimity, I don't mean that we kept taking notes like a jury. I mean that we stayed with every issue until we had what the Quakers call a sense of the meeting. It was time-consuming, but in the long run, it saved time. Eventually, we all got on the same wavelength, so to speak. Of course, we had differences, and big ones, especially in the beginning. For instance, in Section 1, you might think we were merely clarifying our instructions. Not so. It took a long time before we all agreed to a strict interpretation. Rowe and Taylor deserve most of the credit for this. There are many things in the report that look obvious now, but didn't seem so obvious then. For instance, on the relationship of war to social systems, the original premise was conventional from Clausewitz, that war was an instrument of broader political values. Abel was the only one who challenged this at first. Fox called his position perverse, yet it was Fox who furnished most of the data that led us all to agree with Abel eventually. I mention this because I think it's a good example of the way we worked, a triumph of method over cliché. I certainly don't intend to go into detail about who took what side about what and when, but I will say, to give credit where due, that only Rowe, Abel, Hill, and Taylor were able to see at the beginning where our method was taking us. But you always reached agreement eventually? Yes, it's a unanimous report. I don't mean that our sessions were always harmonious. Some of them were rough. The last 6 months, there was a lot of quibbling about small points. We'd been under pressure for a long time. We'd been working together too long. It was natural that we got on each other's nerves. For a while, Abel and Taylor weren't speaking to each other. Miller threatened to quit. But this all passed. There were no important differences. How was the report actually written? Who did the writing? We all had a hand in the first draft. Jones and Abel put it together and then mailed it around for review before working out a final version. The only problems were the form it should take and whom we were writing it for. And of course the question of disclosure. Doe's comments on this point are summarized in the introduction. You mentioned a peace games manual. What are peace games? I wanted to say something about that. The report barely mentions it. Peace games is a method we developed during the course of the study. It's a forecasting technique, an information system. I'm very excited about it. Even if nothing is done about our recommendations, which is conceivable, this is something that can't be ignored. It will revolutionize the study of social problems. It's a byproduct of the study. We needed a fast, dependable procedure to approximate the effects of disparate social phenomena on other social phenomena. We got it. It's in a primitive phase, but it works. I'm going to argue that this is a foundational method of game theory. So, research game theory. How are peace games played? Are they like Rand's war games? You don't play peace games like chess or Monopoly any more than you play war games with toy soldiers. You use computers. It's a programming system, a computer language like Fortran or Algol or Jovial. Its advantage is its superior capacity to interrelate data with no apparent common points of reference. A simple analogy is likely to be misleading. So, again, war games. What's that computer? Would you like to play a game? They've been doing this stuff since the 60s, since the 40s, since the Turing test. And I will argue that computers are a bit older than what we're thinking as well. Now, I could go off and go down an entire tangent about how AI is always, its goal is to give us tech. Well, I'll save that for another time. Here we go. But I can give you some examples. For instance, supposing I ask you to figure out what effect a moon landing by US astronauts would have on an election in, say, Sweden, or what effect a change in the draft law, a specific change, would have on the value of real estate in downtown Manhattan, or a certain change in college entrance requirements in the United States on the British shipping industry. You would probably say first that there'd be no effect to speak of, and second, that there'd be no way of telling. But you'd be wrong on both counts. In each case, there would be an effect, and the Peace Games method could tell you what it would be, quantitatively. I didn't take these examples out of the air. We used them in working out the method. Essentially, it's an elaborate high-speed trial and error system for determining working algorithms, like most sophisticated types of computer problem solving. This is the 60s. If you look at the lie NASA told us about the power of the computer that got them to the moon, we didn't go to the moon, but if you look at that, and you look at the computing power then, imagine the computing power now and the data and information they are crunching. I'm going to find the website, but they literally have the entire Earth mapped on this website with you, and they have all of our information, and they are running sophisticated game theories. If you get a chance, I might do a video about this, but I have so much on my plate. Red Team Leader hit 4chan a while back, like 2015, I'd have to look it up, but he did the scenarios that the government did in case of we went into a civil war. None of the outlooks are good, and that's why the government is like, snap, oh boy. But with what's coming, it seems to me that whether they've CERNed us into a Mandela effect timeline or whatever, they're getting more comfortable with the idea of something going kinetic locally, or something going kinetic globally. More so than just the lie of Russia, Ukraine that they're giving us. And now to continue. A lot of the games of this kind you read about are just glorified and conversational exercises. They really are games and nothing more. I just saw one reported in the Canadian Computer Society Bulletin called a Vietnam peace game. They use simulation techniques, but the programming hypotheses are speculative. The idea of a problem-solving system like this is not original with us. ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Department of Defense, DoD, now called DARPA, has been working on something like it. So has General Electric in California. There are others. We were successful not because we know more than they do about programming, which we don't, but because we learned how to formulate the problems accurately. It goes back to the old saw. You can always find the answer if you know the right question. Supposing you hadn't developed this method, would you have come to the same conclusions in the report? Certainly, but it would have taken many times longer. But please don't misunderstand my enthusiasm about the Peace Games method. With all due respect to the effects of computer technology on modern thinking, basic judgments must still be made by human beings. The Peace Games technique isn't responsible for our report. We are. Now, jumping in, my word of warning is, what happens when they take it out of our hands and they leave it to ChatGPT, when they leave it to OpenAI? When all these AI algorithms are supposedly considered separate, but all under the same umbrella of one giant AI manipulating them all at some point. So all of these AIs are going to be collated into one giant egregore, artificial intelligence, an AI messiah, which I will argue is going to be Lucifer manifest at some point. But that's just me. Your results may vary. Page 17, statement by John Doe. Contrary to the decision of the special study group of which I was a member, I have arranged for the general release of our report. I am grateful to Mr. Leonard C. Lewin for his invaluable assistance in making this possible, and to the Dial Press for accepting the challenge of publication. Responsibility for taking the step, however, is mine and mine alone. I am well aware that my action may be taken as a breach of faith by some of my former colleagues, but in my view, my responsibility to the society for which I am a part supersedes any self-assumed obligation on the part of 15 individual men. Since our report can be considered on its merits, it is not necessary for me to disclose our identity to accomplish my purpose. Yet, I gladly abandon my own anonymity if it were possible to do so without at the same time compromising theirs, to defend our work publicly if and when they release me from this personal bond. But this is secondary. What is needed now, and needed badly, is widespread public discussion and debate about the elements of war and the problems of peace. I hope that publication of this report will serve to initiate it. Now here's the problem I already see. People like me discussing this stuff. It's boring. It's all conspiracy. Even though it's all happening right. I haven't even read through this yet. And it's all happening. I already know where this is going. And I already know that what I'm going to talk about is already happening before our eyes. But whatever. We're all complacent. It's not an official happening, even though we're having happenings every damn day. It's so easy to wave away what's going on. All the media has to do is just use in mind programming, it's called an anchor and a tell. Anchor, it's like dog whistle. If you belong to a certain group of people, you will have your own internal words and lexicons that mean certain things. So if I hang out with a Mormon group, I can spot a Mormon a million miles away just based on some of the words that they use. Not counting the dress and the ethics that they have and the minds, but just based on some of the words that they use. No other group uses that unique verbiage. So the same thing here. The media has us trained. They only have to say certain things, and the non-thinking consumers of the mainstream media, the Mossad media, will flip on a dime. And they'll just accept and just wave away and move on to the next thing. Just the next current thing. That's all they want. Dictate our morality via the phone and algorithms. And it's very effective. And they are very effective. People don't even know what's happening. All right, to continue. Page 18. The report of the Special Study Group, Letter of Transmittal. To the convener of this group. Attached is the report of the Special Studies Group established by you in August of 1963. 1. To consider the problems involved in the contingency of a transition to a general condition of peace. And 2. To recommend procedures for dealing with this contingency. For the convenience of non-technical readers, we have elected to submit our statistical supporting data, totaling 604 exhibits, separately as well as preliminary manual of the peace games method devised during the course of our study. We have completed our assignment to the best of our ability, subject to the limitations of time and resources available to us. Our conclusions of fact and our recommendations are unanimous. Those of us who differ in certain secondary respects from the findings set forth herein do not consider these differences sufficient to warrant the filing of a minority report. It is our earnest hope that the fruits of our deliberations will be of value to our government in its efforts to provide leadership to the nation in solving the complex and far-reaching problems we have examined, and that our recommendations for subsequent presidential action in this area will be adopted. Because of the unusual circumstances surrounding the establishment of this group, and in view of the nature of its findings, we do not recommend that this report be released for publication. It is our affirmative judgment that such action would not be in the public interest. The uncertain advantages of public discussion of our conclusions and recommendations are, in our opinion, greatly outweighed by the clear and predictable danger of a crisis in public confidence, which untimely publication of this report might be expected to provoke. The likelihood that a lay reader, unexposed to the exigencies of higher political or military responsibility, will misconstrue the purpose of this project and the intent of its participants seems obvious. We urge that circulation of this report be closely restricted to those whose responsibilities require that they be apprised of its contents. We deeply regret that the necessity of anonymity, a prerequisite to our group's unhindered pursuit of its objectives, precludes proper acknowledgement of our gratitude to the many persons in and out of government who contributed so greatly to our work. For the Special Studies Group, signature withheld for publication 30th of September 1966. So, we the Luddite, you just won't understand the weight, the magnitude, and the gravitas of us leaders above you. We know what's better for you. You can't know this. That's how these clowns work. They don't want us to look behind the curtain. They want us slopping in the mud, reaching, grabbing bits of the elephant and never knowing. Everything's compartmentalized. Everything is chimneyed. And what I mean by chimney is, let's say you are a general. You have X amount of projects running. None of the operators running these projects know about each other. They're stovepiped, meaning they're in a room. They have one person, they're working on one puzzle piece, and it goes up to the top. Nobody else knows what they're working on, even though all pieces are working together. Now, in their individual minds, they're looking at the puzzle piece they're working on, and they say, oh, this benefits the whole. This benefits society. This is great. But then you take 3 of those puzzle pieces, put them together, and then you're like, oh shit, I just took out Africa. Oh no, I just wiped out I was part of a program, and they won't know it till later. And then of course they're sworn to secrecy, they're under top secret clearance, they're under NDAs. Nobody has the balls to come out and do anything. And then when they do, the Mossad media will come out and spin a tale that the average normie will accept. And even then, what we get in FOIA requests could be all choose your own adventure bullshit anyway. They only give us what story they want to tell. They will redact everything else. Then as events play out, they will unredact by putting in what they want us to believe next. So we never get full reports because they make it up as they go, is what I'm saying. Anyway, let's continue on. Introduction. The report which follows summarizes the results of a 2.5-year study of the broad problems to be anticipated in the event of general transformation of American society to a condition lacking its most critical current characteristics. Its capability and readiness to make war when doing so is judged necessary or desirable by its political leadership. Our work has been predicated on the belief that some kind of general peace may soon be negotiable. The de facto admission of Communist China into the United Nations now appears to be only a few years away at most. I'm jumping in. Watch my last video. Watch the Jewish roots of communism in China. Communist China became such because of Judaism. And then it was just let in, according to this, in 66 or 65 into the United Nations. Interesting. And I'm not necessarily anti-China. I think China is finally fighting internally and shoving off the yoke of Judaism. However, the problem is they've lived under Judaic threat of communism for so long that the public has accepted it, and they have now Stockholm Syndrome themselves to identify with their captors, and now they are putting up with social credit score and all that. We can't do that here. We cannot accept CBDC. And you're going to have all the shills, all the Trumps, all the triggered of Don Jr. and all these Christy Guilfoyles, whoever they're going to be that they're going to present to us. And now here's one. This is just a tangent while I'm thinking about it. Gavin Newsom. We know he's a cabal player. Don Jr. is literally, I don't know, are they married? I don't pay attention to the drama of it, but Christy Guilfoyle or whatever was Newsom's lady. And now Don Jr.'s with him. Come on, people. What secrets has she given up? Or what does she know? Or is she an infiltrator? Or how much does she align with her ex on things? There's no way Newsom is a good guy. He's the cabal. He's in on it with Pelosi and all them. So Don Jr., he's playing a very 1 degree of Kevin Bacon to these guys. Which team is he on? Oh, but he's Patriot. He's MAGA. He loves Bud Light. He wants us to just vote with our wallets. It's ridiculous. Anyway, here we go. It has become increasingly manifest that conflicts of American national interest with those of China and the Soviet Union are susceptible of political solution despite the superficial contraindications of the current Vietnam War, of the threats of an attack on China, and of the necessarily hostile tenor of day-to-day foreign policy statements. It is also obvious that differences involving other nations can be readily resolved by the three great powers whenever they arrive at a stable peace among themselves. It is not necessary for the purpose of our study to assume that a general detente of this sort will come about, and we make no such argument, but only that it may. It is surely no exaggeration to say that a condition of general world peace would lead to changes in the social structures of the nations of the world of unparalleled and revolutionary magnitude. The economic impact of general disarmament, to name only the most obvious consequence of peace, would revise the production and distribution patterns of the globe to a degree that would make changes of the past 50 years seem insignificant. Political, sociological, cultural, and ecological changes would be equally far-reaching. What has motivated our study of these contingencies has been the growing sense of thoughtful men in and out of government that the world is totally unprepared to meet the demands of a situation. So they're already crying at the behest of their CEOs of what the landscape would look like if we actually had lasting peace. What it would do to their dollars. What it would do to the landscape. It's crazy that peace is their biggest fear. We had originally planned, when our study was initiated, to address ourselves to these two broad questions and their components. What can be expected if peace comes? What should we be prepared to do about it? But as our investigation proceeded, it became apparent that certain other questions had to be faced. What, for instance, are the real functions of war in modern societies, beyond the ostensible ones of defending and advancing the national interests of nations? In the absence of war, what other institutions exist or might be devised to fulfill these functions? Granting that a peaceful settlement of disputes is within the range of current international relationships, is the abolition of war in the broad sense really possible? If so, is it necessarily desirable in terms of social stability? If not, what can be done to improve the operation of our social system in respect to its war readiness? The word peace, as we have used it in the following pages, describes a permanent or quasi-permanent condition entirely free from the national exercise or contemplation of any form of the organized social violence or threat of violence generally known as war. It implies total and general disarmament. It is not used to describe the more familiar condition of Cold War, armed peace, or other mere respite, long or short, from armed conflict, nor is it used simply as a synonym for the political settlement of international differences. The magnitude of modern means of mass destruction and the speed of modern communications require the unqualified working definition given above. Only a generation ago such an absolute description would have seemed utopian rather than pragmatic. Today, any modification of this definition would render it almost worthless for our purpose. By the same standard, we have used the word war to apply interchangeably to conventional hot war, to the general condition of war preparation or war readiness, and to the general war system. The sense intended is made clear in context. So basically, I'm getting that the military-industrial complex needed a think tank to see if peace would be sustainable. Well, and they don't want that. Eisenhower warned us. The first section of our report deals with its scope and with the assumptions on which our study was based. The second considers the effects of disarmaments on the economy, the subject of most peace research to date. The third takes up so-called disarmament scenarios which have been proposed. The fourth, fifth, and sixth examine the non-military functions of war and the problems they raise for a viable transition to peace. Here will be found some indications of the true dimensions of the problem, not previously coordinated in any other study. In the seventh section, we summarize our findings, and in the eighth, we set forth our recommendations for what we believe to be a practical and necessary course of action. All right, I'm going to use this as a stopping point. We're already an hour 15 in. I've completed all the sections. I'm going to break them into sections, I've decided. So this is part 1. And this just covered the introduction, getting all the chess pieces on the board for understanding, and a little bit of my personal insights into where this is going. But we've already been given a general synopsis of where this is going. The rest, and it does just get markedly worse. So I'll try to get this up later this week when I find the time to add the edits and add the pictures as I read along. Until next time.